You're saying, so we were saying about, I was saying I think it's fair that Jews got 22% of British mandatory Palestine, and I think that's something that we should celebrate. We've been persecuted in every nation that we've lived in, including your nation, and we've finally got a safe haven. 22% of British mandatory Palestine, an area we've lived for thousands of years. Surely that's worth celebrating.
Where do you live?
Where do I live? Northwest London.
So why do you not live in Israel if it's so great and it's worth celebrating to such a degree?
Because I have an elderly mother with Alzheimer's who I care for.
Alright, no worries, no worries, it's fine, no, that's fine. Right, look, at the end of the day, okay, yes, in the beginning, okay, the area that we're talking about, Palestine, Israel, okay, we don't discuss borders. The area that we're living, of course, okay, that was mainly Jewish. Okay, we're going back a long time, okay? But, you know, there was no Islam. And there was no Christianity to start with, okay? Now, at some point in time, okay, I think, if you don't hold me to this, but I think it's approximately about 300 AD, Christianity started taking off in the Middle East in a big way. Okay, it didn't take off when Jesus was around, we know that. He died. Okay, now you need to understand, where did all the Christians come from that were then living in the Middle East? They didn't come from Brooklyn, they didn't come from London. Okay, what happened is some of the Jewish people that were living there over the decades and over the centuries, this is my opinion, they converted to Christianity. So now you have Jews and Christians living in the Middle East, living in that area that we're talking about. Then around about 600 AD, you've got the advent of Islam. Okay, now where did all these Muslims come from? Okay, well, they converted again. It was conversion from Judaism and from Christianity. So now you have three religions living. Okay, now the people that you're talking about that went to go and live in Israel 1917 onwards, okay, they weren't from the Middle East, Joseph. They were never from the individual people that I'm talking to you about, okay? They never came from the Middle East. They came from Berlin and they came from Moscow, okay? To such a degree that out of I think it's 32 signatories of the Israeli independence, okay, in the 1940s, 32 out of 32 of them, okay, only 2 of them were born in the area that we're now discussing. You know that, yeah? 2 of them were born in the area that we're now discussing, Palestine, Israel. The rest of them, okay, came from Hungary, Poland, and the majority of them come from Russia. So how can you tell me, right, that the land there belongs to these individual people?
Okay, so I think it's a real... First, there's always 2 narratives, and most of what you said...
I can't see you.
Okay, I'll
You've got this big furry thing on there.
Most of what you said contradicts the narrative or my historical perspective. So most Arabs that came to live...
That's why we're on different sides.
Most Arabs that came to live in that region were actually part of the Arab conquest. So both of us are against colonisation, yeah? None of us... I would assume neither of us think colonisation's a good thing.
No, it's not a good thing. No.
Yeah. So one of the most successful colonising projects was the Arab conquest, which stretched all the way up to Morocco. So for instance, you had a Berber queen who fought the Arabs as they came to take the country. And what happened was the Arabs colonised people. They spread Islam either by the sword or with dawah, which is the call to Islam. And what happened was most of the Arabs that live in modern day Israel, West Bank, Gaza, that region, are actually certainly not indigenous to the land. While there are some, without a doubt, who've lived there for centuries, even thousands of years, some, as you described, who were originally Jewish families and then converted to Islam, they are by far the minority. The most common names in that region are things like Al-Masri, Al-Saud, Al-Maghribi, so the Egyptian, the Saudi, the Moroccan, these are all Al-Bosna. Yasser Arafat, Izzeldin Al-Qassam, all these huge Palestinian names were not born in that region. Yasser Arafat was born in Egypt, in Cairo. Izzeldin Qassam was born in Lebanon. So these are not indigenous people. But I've got friends, for instance, who've lived in Gaza for many, many centuries, lived there as Jews, and then were kicked out when the Egyptians conquered the land. So you're right, there were Europeans that came there and flocked there, but there were also Arabs that came there. In 1882, the population of that region was 270,000 Muslims, yeah?
Right.
By 1946, it had swelled to 1.26 million. So there was mass Arab migration and mass Jewish migration.
It's interesting that you talk about names, right? Do you know Golda Meirson?
Yeah.
She became Golda Meir.
Yeah.
Okay, what about Daniel Oster? These are signatories of the Israeli Declaration of Independence, okay? They don't sound very Middle Eastern to me.
But that's fine.
You've got Wolf Gold.
But
okay, you've got Yehuda Lib Fishman.
So what I'm trying to tell you is
this is what I was talking to you about. The only person you've got, okay? You've got Becher Shalom Shikri, okay, and you've got Sadia Kabashi. They're the only two people born in the Middle East that were on the Israeli Declaration of Independence.
But do you know why that is? Because
they came from Europe.
Eastern European and Western European Jews were more educated than their Jewish counterparts from Muslim lands. They went through the best universities in Western Europe, so they took up leadership positions because they were educated. It didn't mean that the mass movement themselves were not of Middle Eastern origin. There was a large, for instance, most of the property that's claimed by settlers was actually purchased by Yemenite Jews. And what I'm trying to explain to you is that the Jews that were living in that land, a huge proportion of them were from the Middle East. A large proportion of them had always lived there. If you visit Hebron, if you visit all these places...
Thank you, mate.
If you visit all of these places, you'll see Jewish houses. So my friend who was kicked out of his house in Gaza by the Egyptians, when the Egyptians conquered Gaza, he moved up to Hebron, and he moved into one of his family's old Jewish houses, which had candelabrum, Jewish candelabrum, carved around the ceilings. They'd lived there for centuries and centuries. Those Jews who lived in British Mandatory Palestine have as much of a right to self-determination as the Arabs that you support. Yeah? And that, I'm sure we can agree.
Right, at the end of the day, okay, the original inhabitants and the descendants from the original inhabitants, okay, are the only people that really have a right to live there, because as you've said to me yourself, okay, you don't agree with colonialism,
yeah,
okay, 100%. And boatloads of Jewish people arriving from Europe to the Middle East, okay. What is that?
No. So could you describe what you think colonialisation is? Because that's not
Well, it's the imposition of another group of people upon native indigenous population.
One sovereign entity establishing a colony of its people in another place. So when you infer that Jews are colonising the area, you're suggesting...
I think it's a little bit more broad. I think the definition's a little bit broader than that, to be perfectly honest with you. I think the definition, Joseph, is a little bit broader than a nation imposing itself upon others, okay? I believe that it's a European colonisation, okay? So even though there is no such government as a European government, it's clearly a European project, okay?
This is why it's so offensive to us, Damian.
Why?
We were slaughtered by white Europeans like you.
No, don't. I won't talk to you. If you're going to be like that,
no.
If you're going to say like me,
no. I mean,
no. Right.
Okay, white people.
That's offensive.
You want to talk about white privilege and things like that. Not you personally, but people on the left.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm talking about that. My people were slaughtered in Europe by colonisers. Yeah?
Right. I agree. But not like me. I'm a pacifist.
Not like you. You're okay, sorry. I rephrased that. I mean, people of the ethnic group that you belong to. Yeah. I'm saying Jews have been colonised. Jews have been massacred. Arabs are colonisers. White Europeans are colonisers. Jews are not. We've had no territory other than this tiny little strip of land. And to brand us and label us as colonisers is so insulting when all we're doing is escaping the persecution.
Can you not? Right, obviously, I'm talking to you.
Okay.
There's not a lot of people that would talk to you.
That's
right,
true.
so please don't twist my words.
Okay.
I never said Jews were colonisers.
Okay, sorry.
I said Europeans. Were the colonisers. Their religion, okay, some of them would no doubt have been Jewish. Most of them are probably Jewish. But it doesn't mean...
you're talking about the British and things, and sorry I misunderstood.
I'm talking about the people that have moved en masse to Israel,
but
Palestine.
Most of them are from the Middle East. The majority of Israeli Jews are from the Middle East.
I don't think they are.
We're
going to have to agree to differ on that.
I mean, you've been to Israel, yeah?
I'm not allowed in.
Okay, that doesn't...
Can you get me in?
Pardon?
Can you get me in? If you can get me in, I'll go there.
I can get you in. I can do a tour, and you'll meet all the people you hate, the settlers, everyone, and you'll see the different things. But I will get you in.
I'd really like to have a word with Annette Cohen.
Because the reason I'm saying what I'm saying is we never settled anywhere. We're not colonisers. We've lived in that region. If you go to Israel, when you get in, you'll see the majority of Israelis don't look like me. They don't look like ginger and pale skinned. They're dark skinned. They're dark skinned. The majority of Israelis are from the Middle East. Over 56% of Israelis are from the Middle East. Look, go on Wikipedia if you don't believe me. Go on Wikipedia.
Oh, come on.
But just look at the demographics of the Jewish population of Israel. It's like less than 4% come from America. What I always hear is American Jews came and stole land from Arabs. Right. It's simply not true. There's very few American Jews there. The Jews that came from Europe were escaping massacres carried out not by you, but by white, ethnic Europeans slaughtering them. They were escaping massacres in the European world, and the Arabs, the Jews from the Arab lands were escaping massacres from the Arab lands.
I don't mean this to come across as ignorant or whatever. Okay, but I only know of the genocides that started around about World War II.
Okay.
So I don't know if you're talking about genocides that happened before that of the Jewish people, because we weren't taught about that.
So you have, for instance, the Inquisition, where thousands upon thousands and thousands of Jews were slaughtered. In Muslim lands, we had similar stories.
No, let's talk about in Europe.
Okay, so in Europe, there were many massacres. My family came here in the early 20th century, before World War II, and they were escaping massacres in Poland. No. So, I mean, there's a long history of Jewish suffering in Europe, not at the hands of you, but at the hands of white Europeans. And so when we're told that we're colonising...
No, I said Europeans were colonising it. I didn't put
the Jews
that
came from Europe. The Jews that came from Europe were escaping persecution. They weren't working as a colonist.
No, they were welcomed at first.
They weren't. They were. This is another life.
I can show you pictures. Welcome of Palestinians standing there welcoming Jewish immigrants. So, welcome our brothers and sisters.
What year are you talking?
We're talking about like before World War II.
So 1929.
Yeah, something like that.
So 1929. So pretty much from the Nabi Musa riots, which was at the beginning of the 20th century, right the way up to World War II, Palestinians led by the Black Hand, you know the guy I told you about before, is Al-Din al-Qassam, who the Qassam missile named after. They were slaughtering Jews in the land. So while there were definitely some Muslims and some Christian Arabs that welcomed Jews, there was also armed resistance to them. And they slaughtered them. So, for instance, in 1929, the Jewish community of Hebron was horrifically massacred. Babies were burned alive. It was not pleasant. So,
now you know I could list atrocities committed by Israel, but I'm not going to.
No, and I agree. There have been atrocities on both sides. What we're saying is it's not this simple black and white history. Bad things have been carried out by both people. But the thing we object to is when we're called colonisers, when in reality we've never colonised land. We're actually indigenous to it. Me personally, half Irish. I'm also indigenous to Ireland.
No, I'm going to go down. I'm just going to finish this up because I don't want Joseph to think that we're. Don't want to talk to him or anything like that. You know what I mean? So basically, at the end of the day, we're going to wrap it up because I'm going to go. Yeah. I'm going to stroll down there. As a British person, okay, I feel ashamed of the fact, and I know you know this is a whole other argument and all that. This is my view. Yeah, I'm entitled to my view, just as you're entitled to yours. I feel ashamed at the way it was done. That the Palestinians, the Arabs, rose up against the Ottoman Empire to fight for our empire, to fight for Britain, to fight, for in World War I for Britain and the empire. They were told that they would have their own state, they would be assisted in creating their own state. Whilst they were fighting, you got Sykes and Picot chopping up the Middle East willy-nilly. And then after they were fighting, after they were dead, you've then got the Balfour Agreement that then goes and gives their land away. So that's why I feel ashamed as a British person. I hope one day, okay, this is what I hope, and I'm not saying this is a piece of advice because the last thing the Middle East needs is another English person saying what should happen. But I would like to see a day when Israel and Palestine live side by side in peace. And then as a progression, as you see with other states around the world, they start to trade with each other, people start to get on with each other, and in the end you'll see the borders come down and you'll have two states with no need for a border. Okay, as the generations go and the cycle of violence stops and the hatred and the vengeance subsides on both sides, okay, you will see two states living peacefully side by side, and I think that would be the best solution for the Middle East and for the rest of the world.